Thank you and welcome to this presentation on 10 common obstacles to the conduct of ethical business. Now, a couple of years ago, about a decade ago or so, we heard of Enron, and big North American firm had a major issue with business ethics. And sometimes my colleague scholars in accounting and finance have done several studies to show that, ironically, the bigger an organization becomes, they have the propensity to engage in ethical and legal practices. Now, that for me seems like a contradiction in terms to the extent that I think that as you get bigger, you should have the most sophisticated accountants, the most sophisticated auditors. You should be conforming to ISO standards. You should know IFRS standards. You should know how marketing audits are done. But it will seem like size alone, geographical reach, international stature doesn't necessarily portend to good behavior. So it's very important to identify some important obstacles to maintaining ethical behavior in the workplace and figuring out how to overcome these obstacles. So obstacle number one, the issue of greed. Greed is a very important word. Greed. Sometimes, my dear listener and those watching me, I find it fascinating when certain types of graft, certain types of illicit behavior, certain types of corruption is mentioned, because you wonder in the scheme of things, those who are consumed with such greed, you can't help but wonder, what are they going to do with all the hundreds of millions of dollars they are illegally apportioning to themselves? Greed. It is a selfish and excessive desire for more of something, as in money, than is needed. More than you need. Now, business executives are prone to greed. Pastors are prone to greed. University lecturers are prone to greed. Pharmaceutical company CEOs we are all prone to greed. So greed isn't always about money. Sometimes people are greedy for power, for status, for influence, and I want to share with you a few ideas of keeping greedy tendencies in check. For an organizational entity, one of my first proposals to you would be, if you can, please, establish a certain ethical culture that puts principles like honesty, fairness, virtue, faith, integrity, accountability ahead of a certain consummate desire to make excessive profit. So put proper organizational principles ahead of excessive profit making. Again, let me balance this discussion. I'm not saying that it shouldn't be excessively profitable. No, I'm not saying that at all. Again, I need to make a small biblical reference here. Ecclesiastes 7:12 says that money is a defense. So being profitable is good. Bible also says that in all labor there's profit. Being profitable is good. But don't pursue profit to the extent of losing your mind, losing your principles, losing your ethics, and behaving in a way that compromises not just the organization, but people within it, and then the community in which you work. Second recommendation, set up a system of checks and balances that promotes accountability and transparency. Third recommendation for dealing with greedy tendencies, set up a reward system that combines financial and other incentives to do good, not just to do well. I repeat, to do good, to be ethically oriented, to be honest, not just to meet certain hard quantitative targets. Second issue I want to discuss in this dilemma discussion is the issue of group thinking. Now, group thinking relates to a certain failure to invite, recognize, or listen to different points of view. And sometimes it is an obstacle to overcome in business because group thinkers can intimidate the people who might present different viewpoints in a number of ways. So if managers and executives display attitudes which portray they are willing to invite the opinions of others, chances are that they'll get some valuable input from the people around them. Otherwise, you find that decisions are taken that favor a few, and that's where greed tends to take center stage. Number 3, tunnel vision. Tunnel vision. Somebody with tunnel vision is always opposite of somebody who has a bird's eye view of issues and looks at issues from different but interrelated perspectives. So in tunnel vision, what happens is that you don't pay attention to different viewpoints. You only want to go down one straight narrow path. And you tend to ignore relevant details that can make the organization better. Now, tunnel vision is most common. People have a corporate culture that doesn't make any allowances for failure. So it's like we have to go this way and only this way and only this way. And it can create a situation where you don't have the best ethical climate to work with within the organization. The next ethical dilemma is self-interest. Now, if you watch off my earlier lectures, I've discussed ethics and theological ethics and Machiavellianism and so on and so forth. And self-interest has its roots sometimes in being Machiavellian. Now, research in various disciplines, management, strategy, finance, marketing, research in those disciplines have indicated that people tend to do what will benefit them and avoid doing what will harm them. But research also suggests that motivated self-interest, that is, an individual's specific needs or wants, can tug people towards unethical behavior if the self-interest isn't countered by some factor. So motivated self-interest can stem from a number of factors, number of needs, number of desires, like for instance, fear of losing a job, desire for more pay, desire for more status, desire for more power, more influence. So motivated self-interest can become a problem because people are nudged towards doing the wrong things in order to either survive or gain some interest. Arrogance. Every business leader needs confidence. But all too often, confidence develops or metamorphoses into arrogance. Now, once arrogance sets in, the situation that you have is that the leader or the manager believes that he or she is smarter, more visionary, and more right than anybody who's operating around them. So there's a certain fragile line between confidence and arrogance. And I think that line is the line of humility. Where, for instance, you have a clear sense of what you can control and not control, and you attribute your success to a certain combined team effort rather than your individual capacity alone. So if you want to diminish tendencies towards arrogance in your company, be sure that your leaders invite and respect dissenting opinions in their execution of the corporate agenda. The next issue I want to discuss is labor cost. Labor cost. Hiring workers can be expensive. We can't run away from that fact. And labor is always a big line item when it comes to budgets. Nearly every major company faces the labor cost issue at a certain point. So when those pressures begin to occur, you have to make certain key decisions. Do you outsource your labor to the lowest bidder and choose not to examine whether that bidder abides by, for instance, child labor laws, overtime rules, generally accepted workers' rights? Or do you take a certain principled stance on workers' rights and accept the blow to the balance sheet? A student of mine 3-4 years ago conducted her long essay examination when she was studying for an EMBA in marketing, in trying to understand the outsourcing practices of certain multinational banks in a country called Ghana. What she was trying to see was, is there a discrepancy in the commitment, attitude, self-orientation of full-time staff versus non-full-time staff in those multinational banks? She found interestingly that most of the non-full-time staff are not committed. Most of them don't have any proper ethical consideration for the work they do in the banks. And for what it's worth, the banks pay good money to the third-party agencies who are supplying the personnel, but they pay such a pittance, such a small salary to those they are sending to the banks, that these people who come are always angry, ready to fight, and they are not good complements to the full-timers who work in those banks. So labor costs can lead to all sorts of challenges if you are not careful. And some companies have tried to chart some sort of sensible middle cost in this issue relating to labor costs. So Nike, for instance, and I'm sure you've heard about Nike in the last month or so regarding some very interesting brand ambassador they chose for a campaign. They've not been famous only recently. A couple of years back, they came under pressure because of issues of child labor and labor cost, and there was intense criticism of them regarding what their suppliers were using as child labor regarding what they do. So what Nike did was that they tried to implement programs to monitor their overseas suppliers to ensure that they were complying with basic human rights and workers' rights standards, to ensure that the quality was maintained across the full supply chain. Issues of production cost. Very similar to labor costs. Even if you get cheap labor without violating ethical standards, the cost of materials, equipment, land, all the stuff you need to manufacture products can be really, really high. So, responsible managers, like responsible consumers, shop around for the best deals to make sure they aren't overpaying for the products they need. But a growing body of research is showing that consumers are willing to pay extra for products they trust. So in the long run, you serve your company's best interest by strictly enforcing quality and safety standards. So very similar to the Nike example I just used. Trust me, where you get your raw material from matters in an increasingly socially responsible world. In fact, nowadays, in the UK, for instance, you can't put out a food product without stipulating the calorific content of that particular food product. So you can't have orange juice or meat or fish without explaining exactly what the calorific content is. What that then means is that where you got the oranges, or where you got the fish from, or where you got the pork from to produce the product matters in relation to the safety of the customers who are buying those products and services. So production cost can also be an ethical dilemma. Then the issue of transparency or the lack thereof. Transparency is simply making information available to both employees and the general public. And the more open you are as a company, the less likely it is that you suffer ethical nearsightedness. Because while some atmosphere of secrecy breeds lack of accountability, transparency invites inspection, and with inspection often comes increased honesty and higher ethical behavior. Fear, my goodness, fear. Now, fear is a double-edged sword when it comes to business ethics, because on the one hand, it can help people fight the temptation to behave unethically because they fear the consequences of getting caught, feeling embarrassed, or embarrassing family members and friends. But at the same time, fear too can lead to a situation where people refuse to speak up, because while they can see that certain ethical practices are being compromised, for fear of being victimized, they shut up and they put up with the illegal behavior of those they are working with. Sometimes they want to be promoted, sometimes they want to get their bonuses. So they are not about to speak up against a superior who is behaving in unethical conduct, knowing full well that in spite of a 360-degree appraisal program, the supervisor's voice is still the loudest in determining whether or not they get promoted. They will say nothing. So fear can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can lead people to behave properly. On the other, it can lead people to behave improperly because they shut up for fear of being victimized. The next issue is the issue of double standards. Double standards has to do with refusing to walk your talk. And in this general regard, I think personally that CEOs, director generals, deans, provosts, head of departments, vice chancellors, rectors, I think all those who are charged with the responsibility of managing a unit, an institution, an international institution, must make sure they totally walk their talk. In fact, I think anybody who leads must be able to demonstrate by virtue of what they do that they are billboards of ethical excellence. When people see them, they are like a big message advertising what is best regarding ethical standards and inviting all their followers to also follow what they are doing. Managers who take this do as I say but don't do as I do kind of approach, they're exhibiting double standards because the supervisors don't know whether to follow your work or follow your talk. Because there's a very big discrepancy between your work and your talk. And the same issue also arises when managers ignore ethical violations from high performers but punish the same infractions from average or low performing employees. Now, let's be real here. Sometimes, you have this very high performer who meets all the targets, and because they bring you so much money, when they indulge in some ethical infringements, you don't take them to task. Because you are afraid if you speak out and say, hey, I'm working again, I'm going to your competitor. Please, you must try as much as possible to make the playing field even for everyone. Because the only way to avoid problems associated with double standards is to ensure that everyone, from CEO to the lowest member of the organization, are all held on the same expectations when it comes to ethical conduct. On this issue of double standards and the avoidance of same, I want to thank you very much for listening, and I'll come back to you again very soon on 10 ways managers can keep their companies totally ethical. Thank you for listening. I'll see you again soon.